Hi, I'm Claire. It's day 3 of the 12 days of Clairemas, and today we're going to look back at my November reading. I actually recorded the footage for this video before I even went to France for Christmas, so that was like 3 weeks ago. And then of course I didn't have time to edit the video until now, which is why you are getting my November wrap-up on the 27th of December. Very profesh. Anyway, please excuse the change in outfit, hand framing, and lighting, and also hair colour, as I hand you over to Claire from the past. First up, I read all 3 volumes of Sarah Anderson's collected comic strips. You will have seen those around the internet, like on Twitter, people share them a lot. They are these like adorable cartoony style drawings about Sarah Anderson's life and her various troubles with like having to be an adult, and they are extremely relatable. So like I said, I read 3 volumes of her collected comics. The first one is called Adulthood is a Myth, the second one is called Big Mushy Happy Lump, and the third one is called Herding Cats. So they are collections of her comic strips. So throughout the books it's mostly a whole bunch of those little one-page comics, and again, if you have been around on the internet spending too much time on Twitter or Tumblr, you will have seen a lot of them, but it was really fun to go through and see which ones I'd seen before and which ones I hadn't, and I really enjoyed that. And then there were also little paragraphs of text at some point where she explained what had led to the creation of such and such comic, for instance, and why she had started writing about a particular theme. In the third book, Herding Cats, she explains how she kind of became a cat lady. Like, she was living in a shared house and they had a mouse problem, so she borrowed her mum's cat for a few months so that the smell of cat would be around the house and scare the mice away without having to like use ineffectual cruel traps. She wasn't really into cats when the cat first arrived, and then by the end she was just like, my tiny furry child, do I really have to give it back? So that part especially was really funny to me as a person that absolutely adores cats. And again, that was Adulthood is a Myth, Big Mushy Happy Lump, and Herding Cats by Sarah Anderson. Next up, I read the first 3 volumes of this new comic series called Fence. It is written by C.S. Pacat, illustrated by Joanna the Mad, and the colours are by Joanna Lafuente. This is a comic that I'd heard about a long time before like this many volumes of it were published, and I really knew from the start that I wanted to check it out, but I hadn't yet, and I'm really glad that I made the time because it was adorable. Now, as you might imagine from the title, Fence is a comic book series all about fencing. We follow kind of 2 rival fencers, or at least they form a rivalry throughout the story. We start by following the character of Nicholas, who is rather new to fencing. He is going for like his first tournament, and as he arrives he's really hopeful that he's going to do really well because he really loves to fence, and he kind of sees fencing as a way out of like a really bad home situation where there's not a lot of money going around, and he's really had to fight for even the most basic education in fencing that he's had so far. And that enthusiasm is kind of dashed really early on when the first person that he has to fence in this tournament is another teenage boy called Seiji, who is an absolute fencing prodigy who's had years and years of training and is at a level like so much more advanced than his, and he basically gets beaten so soundly. Except during that fencing match, despite being beaten very soundly by Seiji, Nicholas actually fenced like pretty well. His training was really bad, but he had really good instincts, and the coach of this really fancy private school where they have a fencing program notices him and invites him to come to the school. He gets a fencing scholarship, he just has to make the fencing team, and then he'll be able to stay at the fancy school, except there aren't that many spots open on the fencing team. There are boys that have already been on the fencing team for 2 or 3 years, and also Seiji has chosen to go to the same school. Nicholas has to deal with the fact that Seiji is his roommate now, and he is a neat freak, and it's terrible. There's all these different aspects of their rivalry that picks up when they have to be in close quarters together. I'm sure everyone who's heard me rave about how much I love Check Please for months and months on end will be in no way surprised to see me get extremely attached extremely quickly to another sports comic with a big ensemble of cool characters and also enemies to lover romance coming up in future. The only question mark I've got over Fence right now is how much more of Fence are we gonna get, because when I was adding it to my Goodreads, I noticed that on the Goodreads page for, I think it was volume 3, some people were talking about how much more of Fence are we gonna get, and there was an implication at least that originally it was meant to be a shorter run of maybe 3 or 4 volumes, but that it had been extended. And honestly, as a reader, when I got to the end of volume 3, like, I loved every bit of it, but the end of volume 3 to me certainly still feels like it's really early on in the narrative. So I don't know if they were just completely off track and had like bad information or were just making stuff up, but I certainly hope that it turns out to get a bunch more volumes, because like I said, I really loved it. If anyone's been reading it and has any info on that, like, please let me know, because I'm very invested in there being a lot more Fence. And finally, for the one novel that I managed to both start and also finish in November, I read The Consuming Fire by John Scalzi. This is the second book in his Interdependency series, and it is a sequel to The Collapsing Empire, which came out last year and which I absolutely loved. In The Collapsing Empire, Scalzi introduces the interdependency, a collection of planets that are linked together through something called the flow. The flow is the method that they use for travel between planets that doesn't take hundreds and hundreds of years. Unfortunately, the flow is changing and shifting, and flow connections between planets are collapsing, and that means that this empire called the Interdependency, where the point is to be dependent upon one another, the point is to share resources, they are not going to be able to depend upon one another when they can't travel between planets anymore. Now, one of my favorite things about The Collapsing Empire, aside from the fact that I generally enjoy Scalzi's writing and that there's a lot of action and all of that, but I really loved the characters especially. And in The Consuming Fire, we follow pretty much the same characters. We follow Cardinia, the emperor of the Interdependency, as she is trying to still deal with the fact that the flow is collapsing and no one is believing her. We follow Dr. Mars Claremont, who is the scientist that has brought Cardinia the news about the flow shoals collapsing, and how he is trying to convince people that it is actually happening. The thing where, with a scientific discovery, even if it turns out to be right in the end, it might take the scientific establishment a while to come to agree that it is happening, even though there is data and evidence. And then we continue to follow the heirs of 2 of the major trading families that are like at the top of the Interdependency government. The Lady Kiva Lagos has a special assignment from Cardinia that she is trying to deal with. She is very angry and very sweary as per usual. And then the Lady Nadashe Nohama Piton is trying to continue on with her scheming from the first book, except there are complications. I don't want to say too much more for those who haven't read the first book, but it continues to be really fun in that kind of like political intrigue sort of fun. I don't know how fun it sounds to everybody else, but it sounds really fun to me. I'm gonna stop saying the word fun now. So aside from really enjoying being back into the heads of those characters, I also really enjoyed the progression of the main plot, what's going on with the flow. I really liked. There is something that's hinted at in the first book that got developed, that I really, really like in Mars Claremont's storyline, so that was really, really great. And then I also really enjoyed the fact that the theme of history and how history is made and created and for whom, and how things start maybe as a PR move and then later on become like historical fact or historical legend. That progression I thought worked really well thematically and I really enjoyed it. I'm sure hoping there will be more of that in the third book that's called The Last Emperor, and I'm not sure, I think it might be coming out in 2020 now, so that's a bit sad to have to wait, but I will take it when it comes out and I will be super happy to read it. There were only a couple things really that I wasn't wild about in Consuming Fire, and one of them was that even though we do get a little bit more development in the relationship between two of the main characters, I wish there had been a bit more focus on that. And I know it's not the main plot, it's just a romance bit, quote unquote. It was super cute in both of the books and I just wish that there had been, you know, a lot more of it. And then the other thing that really bothered me is something that felt like a dropped plot thread that hadn't been picked up, which, I mean, maybe it's a bit unfair to say that at the end of book 2 of a 3 or maybe more book series, because it might well get picked up in the next book, but there was one character who was kind of indiscreet and ran their mouth, and as a result of that, bad thing happened and nothing like came of that. It's not even that there was no retribution, is that that character didn't realize what they had done and didn't like hear the consequence of completely talking out of turn in a way that it kind of feels like they should learn about it so that they can have a bit of character growth. It is kind of tricky to talk about the second book in a series, especially the second book in a fairly popular series like this one, where I'm sure plenty of people have read the first book and plenty of people want to read the second book if they haven't done so yet. It's not been out for a very long time, so I don't want to go giving plot details about things that are going to happen, but then at the same time I feel like maybe it's a little bit of a boring like commentary from me to be like, well, someone did a thing, but then nothing happened about the thing. So yeah, it's one of the things that I'm not sure how to handle, but I had to talk to you about the Consuming Fire because I really, really enjoyed it. I'm assuming it probably is gonna end up on my like favorite books of the year whenever I come around to making that video, because, you know, it was still really, really, really fun to be back in that world, and I have a really strong suspicion that this series is going to get a lot of rereads from me in future, and that's actually like not that common for me. Again, this was The Consuming Fire by John Scalzi, the sequel to The Collapsing Empire. So that's it. These were all of the things that I read in November. I didn't end up finishing that many things, but by the end of the month, I had like 4 books on the go. So those will have to wait until my December wrap-up to be covered, but that will be another one of the 12 Days of Claremont videos, so hopefully we can get back on track with doing end of the month wrap-up right at the beginning of the next month and not like 27 days. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video despite its slightly tardy arrival, and please let me know in the comments if you've read any of the books that I read in November, or if you have any recommendations for things that I should read based on the books that I talked about in this video. If you'd like to see more from me, you can check out a previous video on screen right now. And if you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button that's on my face for a new video from me every week. I've been Claire, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.